Scared for Reals.
Hey, Chris O'Neill.
And Adam Perry.
All right, June 25th, 1982. You had E.T. returning to the top of the box office charts, Adam. You also had, there are some theaters that still had Mad Max 2. Mm-hmm. Or over here it was called The Road Warrior, but over in Australia it was Mad Max 2. You also had Firefox, Clint Eastwood's action thriller. You remember that one?
Yep.
And you also had Rocky 3 in the theaters.
Oh, yes. Rocky 3. Who can forget Clubber Lang, Hulk Hogan?
Yeah, that was, I think it was like two or three, like a few weeks in the theaters. I'm looking at this box office roster from that weekend. You also had The Wrath of Khan still holding out in the top 5 after several weeks. Mm-hmm. Annie.
Oh, Orphan Annie.
Yeah, Poltergeist slipped down to number 7 at the box office. And then you had Bambi re-released in theaters, rounding out the top 10. 3 new movies opened up. June 25th, 1982, you had Megaforce from 20th Century Fox. But the 2 we're going to talk about this week, June 25th, 1982, Blade Runner, Ridley Scott's 1982 dystopian sci-fi neo-noir masterpiece, and John Carpenter's sequel to the original 1951 film, The Thing, which was a sci-fi horror movie. So, which one do you want to talk about first, Adam?
Well, obviously we got 2 bona fide cult classics here because, as you'll find out and we'll talk about in discussion, these were not instant hits in the slightest.
No.
These things, but they did age like fine wine. And Blade Runner, and especially The Thing in the horror community.
Oh, yeah.
They're so big, so important. So why don't we start, I've always said Harrison Ford's my favorite actor, so let's start with Blade Runner.
Blade Runner. What a history of a film.
Yeah.
So, you got to think, at the time, Ridley Scott, a few years prior, Alien, he had a huge success with Alien.
Right.
He was delving into, because at the time, Star Wars was still the biggest, sci-fi franchise.
Yeah.
It was the biggest film of all time, highest grossing film anyways.
Yep.
At that point in the early 80s. And Ridley Scott wanted to do like a Star Wars kind of, or an answer to Star Wars. Mm-hmm. So he was working on Dune.
Okay.
Dino De Laurentiis actually hired him to do Dune. Mm-hmm. And he was working on that. And then he gets like the short story, and I have to bring it up because I always forget it's a long title. It was Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Okay.
It's a 1968 novel. It's like dystopian sci-fi stuff. Earth's been damaged by like this whole nuclear global war. And you got Rick Deckard, he's the main character. He's not known as a Blade Runner in this novel, but he is a bounty hunter who has to kill 6 escaped Nexus 6 model androids. They weren't called replicants in the novel. Mm-hmm. That was Ridley Scott, and I know there was a couple of screenwriters working on it. They wanted something different than android or robot.
Right.
Because they didn't see themselves as androids or robots. Because Tyrell Corporation, more human than human is the motto. So, but yeah, Blade Runner was so ahead of its time back in 1982.
Sure.
It really was. And they marketed the film as, you saw the trailers for it. I don't know if you saw it like on the archive DVD. They have a bunch of trailers, and they make it seem like it's a sci-fi action movie like Star Wars, or Harrison Ford had just come off of doing Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
And had Temple of Doom come out yet? By the
No. Temple of Doom come out a few years later.
Okay.
No, but
Raiders was definitely out.
And you look at the screenwriters involved with this movie. The original writer of the script, he had Hampton Fancher was the guy who came up with the whole concept. He based it off of Philip K. Dick's novel. he had Robert Mitchum in mind when he was writing the script.
Interesting.
When you think of film noirs, I don't know if you watched a lot of film noirs, Adam, but back in the 40s and 50s, the go-to guy in Hollywood for film noirs was Robert Mitchum. Out of the Past and Crisis, all these movies that there's so many. I can't name them all off the top of my head. Yeah. Out of the Past is a masterpiece from 1947. If you're a Robert Mitchum fan, that's one of his finest movies. But that's like the ultimate film noir. And he was still, he was older, but he could still handle those type of roles. He was in good shape up until when he passed away in the mid 90s. So they had Robert Mitchum in mind. Well, at least Hampton Fancher did, and they weren't selecting Ridley Scott at this point. And I watched that documentary, Adam. That it's like almost 4 hours. They don't tell you though that there was a lot of people eyeing that movie. There's a lot of different directors. So Scorsese was interested in it at first. He never optioned it though. And then there was a producer, Herb Jaffe, in the early 70s. But Philip K. Dick, who had somewhat of a say in this, he wasn't impressed with him. So Michael Dealey became interested. He was the producer, and he convinced Ridley Scott to film it. Again, Ridley Scott had no idea of this at this point.
Right.
And he was filming Dune. That's what he was working on. But someone gave him the novel while he was in the midst of shooting Dune. And things were not happening with Dune. I don't know if you ever watched the final version of Dune, but it was pretty bad. And David Lynch eventually took over for it, and David Lynch shot the movie. And from what I understand on that, he goes, "This isn't my movie." So he totally disowned the movie. And I think certain prints actually, have the Alan Smithy name on it. Directed by Alan Smithy. That was like code for a director who just didn't want any part of the movie or was fired from a project or something, and they released it anyways. But yeah, it was a big mess. And Ridley Scott, I think he kind of sensed it, even though in this Blade Runner documentary they didn't really talk about too much about Dune. But anyway, he just went ahead and started working on Dune or Blade Runner. And it wasn't called Blade Runner at first. It was a few different titles. I'm trying to think of. He got the name Blade Runner from. There was this novel by William S. Burroughs. It was called The Blade Runner. That's what it was called. Obviously, it's just the title only. That's the only similarities. It was a completely different thing. So, Fancher's treatment of it, everyone thought it was great, but when it came to like dialogue and to kind of speed up some of the story, they hired David Peoples to rewrite it, and of course Fancher, they had a hard time with Fancher because like whenever they said, "Hey, we need to change this," that's the thing when you're a screenwriter. I have a friend of mine who's really into screenwriting, and one of the biggest things is you hand in a draft, and he goes, "It's going to have to be rewritten." So he hasn't even had any of his scripts in development, and I know he's written it at least 10 or 12 times. Yeah. And it's not even greenlit for anything. So imagine, like, your script gets greenlit, how many times you have to change it. And I know the producers were getting so frustrated whenever they asked Fancher to change something, it turned out to be a problem. So eventually, he came back to help out with some other parts of the script, but David Peoples was hired to rewrite it, and he got hired. He even looked at the script and like, the script is perfect. Yeah. So obviously he had to. It's basically what Ridley Scott wanted. That was what everyone on the set. Ridley Scott. Most people had a hard time with some of his filming techniques, but he's the director, and he feels, okay, it's my job. Everything falls on me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have let's get it done.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of problems with the pre-production though, because the original company that financed and backed the project went bankrupt.
That's a problem.
Yeah, so they had
That's a problem.
So Dealey did some work with the Ladd Company through Warner Brothers, and they even had Sir Run Shaw of the Shaw Brothers help out a little bit too.
Oh wow!
So they backed the movie. Went way over budget. I
mean, it's going to.
Yes, with Ridley Scott. I mean, to get the sets and everything, and the sets and the atmosphere are like a character in itself. I don't know if you noticed that, Adam.
Well, all of his movies are. I mean, look at Alien.
I know Alien. Even like if you even watch Matchstick Men with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
It's more obviously the sets are more subtle, but they're so crucial to the story.
Right. Yeah.
Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, even Thelma and Louise. All of the sets are a character in his movies.
Well, again, obviously, his biggest hit, Alien. I mean, it said right on the poster, in space, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah.
I mean, like he sets, before you even know what the movie's about, he's setting up the atmosphere and the setting as a character.
Right. Oh, it's just it was just after Alien, it wasn't like he had like 10 or 12 blockbusters like Steven Spielberg, and he could just like, hey, I want to do this movie. He had a hard time with it, and there was a lot of struggles, and it went over budget. I think it cost like almost $20 million before it was all said and done. So I mean, it was just a lot of it was the sets and the special effects, and he had Trumbull there, the guy who helped out Stanley Kubrick on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you have that guy on the set, it's going to be well done with the special effects. So they get through. It was a kind of a rough filming process, as you can imagine. I mean, you look at the James Hong's character who creates the eyes. There was problems with keeping the room cooler. There was like things weren't working out well, and people got really sick on the set because of that. And but the sets, it was just amazing.
Visually stunning.
I know. And principal photography began literally on March 9th, 1981 and ended 4 months later. So it was a pretty rough 4 month shoot.
I can imagine. That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
That's a quick shoot. That really is. Because when you think now, that just goes to, the difference between modern Hollywood and old Hollywood.
Right.
Whereas our monster movies were done in 3 or 4 weeks. This movie filmed in 4 months. A movie like this today would be a half a year to a year.
At least.
Yeah,
I'd have to check because the Blade Runner 2049, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I think that had a longer shoot.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of tension, though, with because Harrison Ford was not the first choice to play the lead of Deckard. Again, Robert Mitchum was someone they really thought of, and I don't think it ever got to the point where they're like, we got to hire Robert Mitchum for this, or let's reach out.
Right.
But there were other actors tossed around. But then someone brought up the fact that Harrison Ford. And I think they even
I'm sorry to cut you off, other than Robert Mitchum, anybody of notice?
I'm trying to remember where because I saw the document. There's a lot of information in that almost 4-hour documentary. But Robert Mitchum was what the screenwriter had in mind. Okay. And again, when you have a film noir, he was the perfect guy to do it. But Harrison Ford, they were thinking of him, and they actually, I believe. I don't know if Ridley visited the set, but a couple of the producers, I think, visited the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they were impressed with Harrison Ford. And they're like, have you thought about Harrison Ford? And so But it was kind of the tension was not the greatest between Harrison Ford and Ridley Scott right off the bat, because because they first met, Ridley and Harrison Ford first met. He was wearing the fedora hat because he just walked off the set and he forgot to take his hat off.
Right.
And Ridley Scott's like, oh, this is perfect. He's perfect. He's got the look and everything. And and Harrison Ford's like, well, I'm not wearing a fedora hat because it's too much like Indiana Jones. I've got to, because it's got to differentiate the characters here. And right off the bat, he gets his hair cut once he's hired. And there was an interview Harrison Ford had, and Blade Runner is not one of my favorite films. I tangled with Ridley. That's a quote. There was a lot of friction with him. And of course, the voiceovers was one thing. And actually, the documentary, you could hear some of the outtakes and Harrison Ford like swearing, what the heck is this, and him, screwing up the lines. And I know Ridley Scott was asked, who's the biggest pain in the arse you've ever worked with? He replied, it's got to be Harrison. But they did have, it seemed like in the documentary they had made up or something, because they seemed like they got along. They weren't like next to each other, but when they were talking, they kind of spoke highly of each other.
Yeah, I'm sure the shoot was rough, and there's egos, there's opinions, there's this thought, that, but I'm sure there's always been a mutual respect for both.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in the documentary. I mean,
right.
It's,
oh, sorry.
Because, you can still respect someone and not have had a pleasant experience working with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he literally, you think about it, Harrison Ford wasn't a superstar at this point. He'd done like one big movie, Star Wars. But Ridley Scott noted, okay, so this guy, he's newer, he's kind of a fresh face, but he hasn't worked with a bunch of just random directors. This guy started off working with Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg.
Right.
So it's like, you got to be prepared when you work with someone like Harrison Ford, because he's already worked with some of the creme of directors, Mm-hmm. Just imagine your first movie being directed by George Lucas, and then your next movie directed by Francis Ford Coppola. It's like literally, American Graffiti came out in 1973, and then he was in The Conversation, directed by Coppola, the following year. It was like boom, boom.
Yeah, and then you got
Apocalypse Now.
Yep.
And before that, right after The Conversation, a few years later, he was in Star Wars.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and then in '81, obviously Raiders of the Lost Ark, which launches Harrison Ford into superstar.
But at that point, he was on the cusp. Raiders of the Lost Ark obviously came out after they started filming Blade Runner.
Right. Yeah.
So he kind of exploded after that, like you said, and became one of the biggest movie stars of all time.
Right.
So, but at this point, he wasn't, and I think you read about all this stuff on the internet. I think they play up the tension was probably bad at the time, but obviously they seem to have gotten along better afterwards.
Yeah, like I said, the movie, the movie itself, as we'll get to, bombs, but over a year it's built its following, it's built its audience, it's become a cult bona fide cult classic. And it's huge, and and to the point that Harrison Ford, a guy who despite all the Indiana Jones movies, does not like doing sequels.
No,
and he comes back for the sequel of Blade Runner, a movie that bombs. So there is something there to admire and respect and appreciate. But look, some people just don't get along. Yeah. And when they work together, they butt heads. But like I said, there's still plenty of mutual respect. How can you not respect Ridley Scott for his work with Aliens and everything? And then you look at Harrison Ford's catalog. Holy crap!
But it's interesting, they didn't have all of that catalog at the time. It's like you look back on it, it's like, but at the time it's hard to put yourself in that time when Ridley Scott's had one success, Harrison Ford's had one success, and
But even so, I mean, like, we should do a show, Chris, on actors and directors who hated each other, but the movie became a success. But that would be a fun show.
Because I don't, from what I gather, they didn't hate each other. They just there was a lot of tension on the set, and it's unfortunate. I almost forgot I probably should put this in front. This awesome. I still have this limited edition box set of Blade Runner. I still have the DVD. I don't have the 4K yet, but they haven't done a limited edition 4K like this was like back in 2007 for the 25th anniversary of Blade Runner.
Very cool.
5 cuts of the film. But we'll talk about the cuts in a minute. Runner. But I want to go back to the sets because I'm sure you've heard of the Bradbury Building in L.A., downtown L.A. That whole setting where that assistant to Tyrell lived by himself, that big multi-level building, that was the Bradbury Building.
No, yep. I remember the Bradbury.
Yeah.
Was, yes.
But it's so cool how that looks nothing like the Bradbury Building. It was, and that's another thing that Ridley really was dead set on shooting at night. Because as amazing as those visual effects looked at night, during the day, you could have seen all sorts of imperfections. So that was one way.
Yeah, using light, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I know on the handful of small independent movies I've worked on, I've always noticed that doing night shoots, not only does it hide the imperfections, but it definitely gives a feel to the movie,
right?
And for actors and everybody involved, you can really sink your teeth in to the world that you're working in,
right?
So I mean, as a pain in the butt it is to work all night long, and to fight the time with the sun and all that. Shooting at night is a cool experience.
Yeah, and you've done a couple of those.
Yes,
but so we're talking about getting Harrison Ford in. I'm remembering some of the documentary now. One actor they actually did meet with. They actually met with one actor. I'm trying to think. I know this is kind of like a stream of consciousness kind of thing, so please bear with us. Dustin Hoffman.
Really?
Dustin Hoffman. Ridley actually met with him in, I think he went over and literally sat down, met with Dustin Hoffman for hours and hours. And Dustin Hoffman wanted to know what is the meaning of the film. Meaning of the film. He was more concerned with that. So, but apparently, he was athletic, but I think there was kind of like he doesn't really look the part and all that kind of stuff. But Dustin Hoffman, I mean, that was another thing. Dustin Hoffman was I think was one of the ones. I don't know if he auditioned for Star Wars, but he was discussed for Star Wars as well. But and I'm glad they chose Harrison Ford because I mean Robert Mitchum, I could see if they were going to keep it like the novel. If they were going to keep it exactly like the novel, Robert Mitchum would have been perfect. But with Ridley's vision, Harrison Ford was perfect for it. Well,
of course. I mean, today to see anybody other than Harrison Ford in the role is just I'm trying to find. I know I've seen lists before where Blade actors who were up for the role or considered for the role.
Well, I think there were other actors, but Dustin Hoffman was the only serious one that was approached. I know, at a round table discussion, you could bring up all sorts of actors like, Gene Hackman, Sean Connery, or
Christopher
whatever.
Reeve he's always on that list. Blade Runner, Mad Max, he was, always discussed.
Yeah, but talk about like serious.
Right.
I mean, they didn't contact Robert Mitchum, but he was like high on the early stages of the script.
Right.
But Dustin Hoffman, I think, was the only other one that was at least he literally had a discussion about it.
Right.
I don't think any other of those actors really had any talks, as far as I know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we don't know officially, but obviously the role goes to Harrison Ford. It goes into one of his, iconic roles of his, incredible career. And as you said, we were just talking about, relationship between director and actor. His impact is felt right away with his look.
Right. Yeah, because he had a haircut that was not in tune with the times or the character, because it's a futuristic dystopian movie, you know. And I know Ridley Scott didn't really like his haircut, but yeah, it fit the vibe. It fit the vibe. One role that Harrison Ford was great, but the guy that really shined in this movie was Rutger Hauer.
Okay.
He really. What did you think of him in that?
Oh, he's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
I mean, again, it's. How can you not think he was absolutely fantastic?
I know, because you could see him as an antagonist, but you kind of sympathize with the guy.
Right.
I mean, the Nexus 6 replicants, as you know, you've seen the movie. I really don't want to go into the plot too much because I think everyone's dissected the plot.
Yeah.
But, you think this replicant, this Nexus 6 replicant, he's very intelligent. He knows a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Why do I only have 4 years to live? Just imagine you have a lifespan of 4 years. You know for a fact you have 4 years. I mean, it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Because here he is. Most of you see right off in the beginning of Blade Runner, they were conceived in 2016, 2017. So some of them were close to the end. Like the Daryl Hannah character Pris.
Yep.
It was only a few months left.
Yep.
And Roy was kind of like the unofficial leader of the replicants. He was very charismatic, very knowledgeable guy. He's violent, unfortunately, but he wants to live longer.
Right.
He just wants to live. I think all of us kind of hope and wish that we could live for hundreds of years, It just doesn't happen that way. And Joe Turkel, who plays the part of Tyrell, he's interesting. He remember he kind of showed up as like just a supporting actor in movies. Remember him in The Shining?
Yeah.
He was also in Stanley Kubrick's Passive Glory. I mean, the guy definitely has an impressionable face, that's for sure. He's in several other movies too. He just passed away a couple of years ago. The guy was in his 90s.
Yeah.
But he literally, Roy Batty, the whole movie, comes back just to try to get to Tyrell to, hey, can you fix me to make me live longer? That's all he wants.
Yep.
And these people getting in his way, and of course, they had a mutiny, I guess, because they kind of describe it at the beginning. I think the book, I haven't read the book, but I know the book goes more into details on that mutiny where the Nexus 6 kind of kill all the crew members, because that's what they were meant. They were slave labor.
Right.
Imagine your sole purpose, Adam, is to be slave labor in off-world colonies. That's all they were made for.
Right.
And of course, Tyrell engineered them in a certain way where they start feeling like they're humans. They start getting emotional. They have thoughts of their own. That's why, all right, we're going to cut them off in 4 years. So,
I mean, that's a solution to our AI problem currently.
Well, it is a problem, and unfortunately,
not to bring that up, I couldn't help myself.
Well, I know artificial intelligence. You can't avoid the conversation. They've opened up Pandora's box, and the elites, the globalists, as they're called, they want to have all of our jobs replaced with artificial intelligence. It's just a sad state of affairs. I mean, these were robots, androids, if you will, and they were called replicants in the movie. I was great, Ridley Scott. They found another word that was similar.
Great use of language.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, this whole movie, all the little subtleties of the movie was just. I mean, it's probably my favorite Ridley Scott film. It's my favorite film starring Harrison Ford. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself because I want to go back to Rutger Hauer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he was the easiest one to cast.
Sure.
And, I mean, at the time, I'm looking at his filmography. Paul Verhoeven. You've recognized that name, don't you, Adam?
Yep.
I mean, he became famous in America for directing RoboCop, Basic Instinct, but he had in the Danish Denmark film community. He had already done Soldier of Orange, and that was a early prominent role for Rutger Hauer. This was he was in Nighthawks. I think he was a bad guy in the Sylvester Stallone movie Nighthawks.
I recall that, yeah.
I mean, that came out a year before Blade Runner was made. Keith Emerson did the score, favorite keyboardist. We'll talk about that some other time. But Rutger Hauer is just so brilliant as Roy Batty, the thoughtful yet violent leader of the replicants. Now, in the story, there were 6 of them.
Yeah.
So in the movie, they did have an actress cast for like a 5th. They were going to have one that died immediately, and they actually filmed some scenes, test scenes, with the 5th one, and it kind of just dragged down the movie. So they had to unfortunately come up. 2 got killed trying to infiltrate Tyrell Corporation. They were zapped, and so it narrowed it down to 4. And gosh, Rutger Hauer in this movie, I mean, it was his first real major splash. And the guy was enthusiastic about it. You could tell throughout the whole movie. He was just he got really into the role.
Sure.
I mean, he really got into it. And
it's one of those parts, though, you kind of have to go all in or you don't.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You can't just kind of just, okay.
You can't phone it. It's a character that you have to really, crank everything up to 11 and go.
And he was, out of all the actors, I think he was the only one that really 100% embraced it fully. Daryl Hannah got into it too, to a certain degree, but Rutger Hauer, from start to finish, the way he dressed, the way he acted, Ridley just was like, this guy. They tried to put some of the subtleties of Rutger Hauer's character into the movie, like he's like kind of. Holding the dove and all that kind of stuff. That was all improv. And the screenwriters wrote that whole monologue when he's dying. That's the thing. It's like you think he's going to kill Deckard. And he's letting Deckard like slip and fall to his death. But then, because he's really in tune with living. So he grabs him and saves Deckard at the end, kind of redeeming his character, being like Mr. Violent, wants to kill everybody. He's obviously upset because this Blade Runner just killed 3 of his friends.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's probably the most emotional part in the movie is when Roy Batty dies, and he knows he's dying. You can see it during their fight that he's like, not yet.
Yeah.
So that whole monologue, he ad-libbed some of that. I don't know if you know that or not.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that whole, the fire ships on Orion, all that stuff was all written. And he even looked when they were reading it, he just added, all the, after all these moments will be lost in time. That was how it ended. And then he added like tears in the rain, time to die. He added that.
Wow.
And it's like the most memorable part of that scene. And then he lets go of the dove. It flies. It's such a beautifully shot.
Yeah.
And again, I saw the final cut when it came out in 2007. The original version, and I can understand Harrison Ford being upset. And I think it was kind of like a compromise that Ridley Scott had to make, because the producers wanted voiceover narration. First of all, they liked because if you remember the film noirs in the past, you had some guy talking, narrating the whole movie. Like Double Indemnity is like the ultimate film noir of the 40s. He's literally telling you how disaster befell him from the start of the movie.
Right.
And they thought, oh, okay, so we'll make it like a film noir and have him narrate the whole time. But they also thought, oh, some of this stuff is really hard for people to understand. It's like,
sure.
And I watched the final cut first, and I had no problems with it. And then this set also includes the original theatrical cut. And it's still great, but it's like the voiceovers, like they literally have a voiceover right after Rutger Hauer delivers that beautifully said monologue, and he dies, and the amazing music from Vangelis swells, the dove goes flying in the air, and as after, like literally seconds after Roy Batty dies, the voiceover comes in. Wow, he wanted to be human all along. It's like we all know that, you know. Right. It kind of ruined one of the finest moments, you know, and it was frustrating to a lot of people who really love Blade Runner. Again, I probably would have sat in the theater and like, why? Because remember Platoon? Yeah. Platoon is the best example of how a voiceover can ruin a scene.
Sure.
You remember
agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, you remember the ending, you know, after all the horrific things Charlie Sheen's seen, he's like literally breaking down, crying in the plane with blood all over his face. And then they have that voiceover, and it's like, we didn't fight the enemy. We fought ourselves. It's like, we know that. We just saw it for 2 hours. So having a voiceover just interrupt moments like that, especially in Blade Runner, it just ruined it.
Right.
Again, it didn't ruin it totally for me because I've seen the original theatrical cut a couple of times over the years, and then in 1992 there's the director's cut. There's also an international cut too, which showed more of the violence. It was like literally, I think it was like a minute or two more. It just focused on the violence, him, you know, pushing in Tyrell's face and eyes, and Daryl Hannah like pulling up on Deckard's nose in the fight.
Yeah.
You know, just a few violent moments like that, which it's fine. The director's cut in 1992 restores some of the puzzling things in the original theatrical cut, and then there's a work print version too. The work print version was kind of when they were sending it out to test audiences.
Gotcha.
And even then, they still had the stupid voiceover at the very end after Roy Batty dies. But the final cut, I highly recommend you watch the final cut of the movie. It's so perfect. It's so perfect. And that was the first version of Blade Runner that I saw. And, you know, I look at the box office tallies that weekend. Blade Runner opened up number 2.
Wow.
Let's see. I'm trying to look at the final gross here. Bear with me as I'm looking. E.T. was number 1. It actually went up 6% from last week to it grossed another $13 million. I mean, again, E.T., it was just such a huge phenomenon.
Right.
But Blade Runner opened up $6 million, but it had to work against a $30-some-odd million budget, so it didn't do so hot. And that probably doesn't include all the marketing that went into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read that it was a $30 million budget, and by the end, it only made like $41 million. So it barely made its budget, and then a little bit.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that was total though, with like all the re-releases and everything, because when it first came out, it was nowhere near 30 million. It was a box office bomb, and literally the documentary shows how they went to different theaters, and it was like, you know, some people just got up and walked out, and then there was, you know, some people went, and there was like 1 or 2 people in there, and they literally noted like, hey, people are lining up for E.T. There were some people lining up for Mad Max 2 that was still out there. Of course, Clint Eastwood. He was always kind of a big box office draw. I think that was a year or 2 after another Dirty Harry movie. So, I mean, Clint Eastwood was still pretty hot at this time. And then you had Rocky 3. It had been out for a few weeks. So, I mean, it's just unfortunate. Some movies have to fail. You know, you can't have every movie be a massive success, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're going up movies like Rocky 3 and...
Yeah, they're more crowd pleasers. I mean, people, you know, E.T., even though there's like, you know, the sad sequence where E.T. almost dies, it's a feel-good movie.
Yeah, you pop in... E.T. was such a phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's...
You pop in Blade Runner, though, it's not a feel-good movie. You're not happy. No. It's not... There's really nothing happy about it. No. I mean, you look at the way the dystopian future is in because it was 2019,
right?
And it's pretty close. LA is really bad right now, and it's even worse. So he captured the feel of
even Elon Musk is the Tesla truck. It was inspired by the vehicles he saw in Blade Runner.
Well, that was the thing. Ridley Scott was watching like George Michael's videos and all sorts of commercials and like different movies. You had a look like Blade Runner. You got to think though, and one thing that really bothered me about the documentary is it was obvious that Ridley and the whole crew was inspired by Metropolis.
Yes.
I mean, there's literally images online that compare like the close-up of the eye and everything like that, the way the skyscrapers looked. I mean, he never acknowledged it. That's one thing that's why I like Martin Scorsese so much. Is he'll tell you exactly, this shot I paid homage to this. And he literally, with all of his actors, all of his crew, if he wants a certain vibe to a scene, watch this movie. And sometimes they'll watch a scene like 100 times.
Yeah.
But you get all that information in watching one of his documentaries, but watching Ridley Scott, he doesn't really mention it, which is kind of like, hey, Metropolis, everyone still trying to remake and try to outdo Metropolis.
Right.
Which I don't think they'll ever do. But I mean, Blade Runner is so damn close when it comes to.
It's very cool.
And it's such a visionary thing. And I'm so glad that Ridley really loved the movie too, because the final cut or whatever it's called, the final cut, it's perfect. And I'm so happy that we have it.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee the movie it still probably would not have done that well, no matter what time of the year you released it back in 1982, because it was just ahead of its time.
Right.
It really was ahead of its time. And just the fact that, we don't have real flying cars like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someday soon.
Yeah, well, you never know.
Yeah, you never know.
And you got like multilingual communities now.
Yeah.
So having Edward James Olmos, Gaff, he literally learned and meshed together like 3 or 4 different languages. He literally went to different schools in LA to prepare for this role.
Yeah.
How much screen time does he have in that? Maybe 5-10 minutes at the most.
Right.
And he really got into it. And,
right.
He's speaking all sorts of different languages because in 2019 LA, the dystopian future, according to Blade Runner, is multilingual. And
it pretty much is.
Yeah, and exactly. I think there are there's a lot of similarities between LA right now and LA and Blade Runner world.
Yeah, you can definitely make it. So, Chris, wrapping this up, because this is a double feature, we have another movie to talk about. For those of you, if you are not seeing this on video, Chris has brought out this awesome briefcase edition.
It's very limited.
Limited Blade Runner. It has all, we've talked about it. All the
5 cuts.
5 cuts of the movie. Chris, you are the physical media guy. Other than this limited edition, beautiful briefcase Blade Runner, where else can we find Blade Runner?
Well, unfortunately, they didn't do it with the Blu-ray. They released all 5 cuts on Blu-ray, but it's not lavish like in this briefcase. And you think with the 4K that they would actually re-release it, but they haven't yet.
Right.
You can get the 4K of the final cut, but the rest, you can find them kind of staggered around on Blu-ray, and it's even the 5-disc like Blu-ray version is not an easy find. You can probably get it at some retailers for $40-something, which isn't bad for 5 cuts of a movie. But it's I certainly hope they do something better with this. And I mean, Blade Runner 2049. I don't want to spend too much time with it. It's visually stunning. Okay.
Yeah.
You have Roger Deakins taking over for the cinematography. I mean, you have Roger Deakins photographing a movie. You're okay.
Yeah.
The guy is one of the best director of photography people of all time. I mean, the colors. I mean, he literally captures the vibe of the original Blade Runner as far as visual effects cinematography. I think they both won the visual effects, and Roger Deakins at least were nominated. I don't think Roger Deakins won for that, which is, the Oscars, as we know, are kind of irrelevant, so to speak. But yeah, Blade Runner 2049 bombed too.
Yep.
It made like 150, almost $200 million, but it had to make $400 million to break even.
Right. Yeah. You're talking about where Hollywood was and where it is now. Holy crap.
You had I'm not good with French, but it's either Denis or Denis Villeneuve. He's done a pretty decent job with the 2 Dune movies, Incendies, Sicario. He took the realms because he literally, Blade Runner is the reason he got into filmmaking, he said. So you're like, oh, good. Some passion. The movie's almost 3 hours long, and it didn't need to be.
Yeah.
But Harrison Ford's great. Ryan Gosling, they're both great. There's some great moments in it, but it just falls short.
Right.
It just falls short. You can't outdo the original ever, but it's just unfortunate. I have no want to revisit it again.
Right.
And I'm not complaining. Again, visually, it's amazing. I hold it right up next to Blade Runner, the original, as far as visual stuff is concerned. I mean, would I've liked it better if Ridley actually took the helms? He was going to, but he was knee deep in the Covenant stuff with Alien, which I wish he would have focused on Blade Runner, because I love Alien. Alien is one of the best sci-fi horror films of all time.
Sure.
But in my opinion, Ridley Scott's best work will always be Blade Runner. So, but again, 4K, you can get the ultimate cut on 4K. I hope if you're got to search a little bit, but if you want to get all 5 cuts on Blu-ray, you can definitely find that out. And that's a problem with Warner Brothers, their DVDs. There's some of these that just don't work anymore because Warner Brothers had a lot of problems in the early to mid 2000s with disc rot.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. At least the final cut still works. And if I want to look at the director's cut from 1992 and the original, all that stuff still works. So, but cool. Blade Runner, you can watch that. Dangerous Days was the name of the original script of Blade Runner. I finally remembered it. Dangerous Days. There's almost 4-hour documentary. If you love Blade Runner, a lot of good stuff in there. A lot of stuff to absorb. That's for sure. So that's Blade Runner. And another movie that came out same exact day in 1982. John Carpenter. I'm sorry about the glare. John Carpenter's 1982 sequel. A lot of people argue it's a remake.
Yeah.
Even John Carpenter says it's a remake. I say it's a sequel to Howard Hawks' 1951, The Thing from Another World, but this is just called John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. It's definitely one of the better sci-fi horror films.
Sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is, in my opinion, other than Halloween, this is John Carpenter's best work.
Oh, I disagree, but that's...
Well...
my favorite John Carpenter movie is Big Trouble in Little China.
Okay.
And then it would probably be a tie between The Thing and Halloween.
Okay.
Because I rated these about equal. But yeah. Big Trouble in Little China.
Big Trouble, that's a fun movie.
Oh, that's a fun movie. It's amazing. But yes.
Anyway,
The Thing. So Adam, what did you watch first, Blade Runner or The Thing? And where were you when you first watched both of them?
Blade Runner is something I watched later, probably first caught in my early 20s.
Okay.
It wasn't really on my radar. I mean, I had known about it and wanted to see it, just, it was kind of one of those things that I'll get around to it when I get around to it. And I'm glad I got around to it.
Right.
The Thing... this is probably one of those movies that I caught when I was discovering the horror genre in my late teens.
Right.
When the big slasher boom of the late 90s came up, because again, all the old guys from the 80s were being brought back to life again. The Carpenters, the Cunninghams, the Wes Cravens, So now you're hearing about all these movies like Hills Have Eyes, The Thing, and
they're remaking them too.
Yeah,
That's another thing.
Yeah. So so that was probably around the time I watched The Thing, and again, all the magazines I read from Fangoria to Horror Hound to whatever else was out there, always praised The Thing for its visual effects, and rightfully so.
Oh yeah, Rob Bottin, man. Oh, Rob Bottin, the makeup and effects. He even got Stan Winston helping out with some of them too.
So yeah, and
brought out the big guns for this one.
Yeah, and I mean, so I watched that, and I watched the original. It's I can understand why it didn't initially click with fans of '82, because
such a happy ending.
Well, not only a happy ending, but again, it's an old school monster sci-fi movie,
right?
And
right,
we really and by 1982, well, we're neck deep in the slasher craze that Carpenter himself created.
Help create.
Well, if not for Halloween, I don't think we would have had the boom. I'm sorry, I don't think.
No, but I mean, if it wasn't for Psycho and Peeping Tom, we wouldn't have had it.
I understand that, but I credit John Carpenter and Halloween for the boom of the 80s.
Okay, the boom okay.
And that's what I'm talking about. We're neck deep into that boom at this time in 1982. And then we get this sci-fi monster movie from the guy who started said boom, and it just didn't click with the horror audiences at the time.
Yeah, the interesting thing is there's a cool documentary on this called Terror Takes Shape. Yeah, it's like almost an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And they delve into a lot of the stuff. And I think if they would have released this in the fall, I think it would have done a whole lot better.
It could have, yeah.
Well, I mean, they filmed it like in the midst of really cold temperatures in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. All right, that's where their Antarctica was. Right. Okay, and it's cold as heck, and it's just such a depress. It's not depressing, but it's just. There's really no happy moments in the movie.
Right.
It really isn't. And I think if they waited towards fall, October, because I mean, gosh, it's sci-fi, but it's mainly a horror movie. Let's just be frank. It's a horror movie, and
and then
it's pretty gruesome. I mean,
and honestly, there's 2 times a year where a horror movie really does its most damage. It's obviously in the fall. Around Halloween, and then right after the change of the year, we get close to Valentine's Day.
Right.
Horror movies are date movies.
Right.
Horror movies are the type of movies that you want to bring a date to. Let them. If you're a guy and a girl, you want the girl to get scared. You want to cuddle up with. They're date movies. Let's just face it.
But back in 1982, they weren't taking dates to The Thing.
No,
it's just so
because I mean, again,
it ends on a down note.
Yeah,
it's ambiguous. They could survive, but probably not. Mm-hmm. Let's just put it that way. I honestly think that John Carpenter, the closest he's ever revealed is, I don't think they make it.
Right.
It just seems like everyone. The consensus is they don't make it. Some people have, McCready is going to have to fight off Childs because Childs disappears, because he had to fight off Wilford Brimley's beast for a while there, and he kind of is not seen until the last few minutes of the movie.
And let's also face about John Carpenter, having listened and read so many interviews with him, the man does not think beyond the last word he writes.
Right. So
when he ended this movie, he didn't think about what happened after them.
No.
He didn't care.
No.
Same thing with Halloween.
Right.
He didn't care what happened to Michael. That's why he hated writing the sequel.
Right.
Because he didn't want to think about it.
No. And that's the thing. Like, he literally, this was like his longest shoot at the time.
Yeah.
From the time it was discussed and from the time he left the door to end it, it was a year. Mm-hmm. A year with everything from planning to shooting, to editing. It took a year to get this movie made. Mm-hmm. And again, I mean, he's got such amazing set crews.
Sure.
And He's got people that last shot where it pans out and you see everything on fire. It's such a amazing shot. Mm-hmm. And the overhead shots when the Swedish guys are trying to kill the wolf dog.
Yep.
So it's just there's so many iconic. It's just a visually. It was more of his one of his more interestingly shot movies. Like he didn't do the usual John Carpenter shots like he been famous for.
Right.
In Halloween, The Fog, and Escape from New York, and but the thing is, The Thing from Another World was such a great movie, and
yes,
I think
it's in Halloween.
His favorite filmmaker is Howard Hawks.
Yeah,
if you know the sight and sound list that the directors submit, I looked at John Carpenter's. I think it was the last time it was sent, 2022.
Yeah,
he literally there's like 4 or 5 Howard Hawks movies on his top 10 list.
Oh wow!
So the guy is probably the biggest Howard Hawks fan there is. I mean, I think Martin Scorsese's close, but he's the ultimate Howard Hawks fan.
Right.
And there was a novella. I think that's how you say it. Novella. It's a shorter novel called "Who Goes There." It was written by John W. Campbell back in 1938, and if you've seen The Thing from Another World in 1951, you know, James Arnett's big looming, you couldn't have asked for a more perfect guy to play the Thing. Big hulking beast of a vegetable.
Yeah.
Because for some reason it was a vegetable. But the novel, The Thing was a shape-shifting creature.
Yeah.
And John Carpenter was more faithful to the novella than Howard Hawks was. And of course, I don't think Howard Hawks came up with the script. He just shot the movie. He's the director.
Yeah.
But I mean, I love The Thing from Another World probably just as much, maybe a little bit more than John Carpenter's movie. But there's a lot of similarities. Like when they set the Thing on fire in the Howard Hawks one, there is, they set him on fire. Smashing through the building just like in the original.
Sure.
But yeah, his thing is more based on the actual book, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, shape-shifting. And, man, some of that work, that Ron Bottin guy, if you watch the documentary, he literally was such a huge fan of Halloween.
Yeah.
That's what really got him into makeup and all that kind of stuff.
Which is weird that, I'm sorry, a movie like Halloween would inspire someone for makeup because there's still a lack of.
Well, I think he wanted to get into the film business. It wasn't at the time. It wasn't makeup, but he knew somebody who worked with John Carpenter, and he actually met John Carpenter when he was filming The Fog.
Gotcha.
And he's like,
"Fog's a great movie."
Oh, it's good. Yes. He literally, can I do anything to help out with this? And he's just like a big geek. He's like, hey, you stand up for a second. And he's like, oh God, he's going to throw me out. But he's like, we need an extra for one of the fog creatures.
Pirates.
Yeah. The pirates. So do this, and be here tomorrow morning. He was just like, oh my God, I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when it came time to do The Thing, he kind of, and everyone said this, as serious as John Carpenter is, they said, like, he's the most fun on the set. He really is.
I've read that a lot. He's a very,
he's got a
very down to earth, very personal, very just chill.
Ridley Scott, it's my way or you're out of here. I think John Carpenter's more loose, relaxed, you know? He kind of lets you be creative, and I mean, look at the makeup work that this guy designed.
Oh, it's
ahead of its time.
I mean, I would say his makeup and the effects are more popular than the movie itself.
Right,
it really is.
Right,
I mean, you can't open a horror magazine
the movie
without seeing an image from this movie in it.
Bottin, the only other time he got to flex his chops before this was The Howling. He did all of that on The Howling, which was pretty cool. The Howling was
all right.
But the makeup work and the effects that he put together were pretty cool on that. But
The Howling,
but this he really he literally even everyone complimented the guy for his imagination, but he was doing so many different designs, so he needed some help. And Stan Winston, there's a name everybody knows when it comes to makeup.
I mean, and we can do a whole show on Stan Winston.
There's Rick Baker and Stan Winston in the 80s.
They were the guys.
Yeah, they were the two guys.
And that's probably why his work, he did great work in The Howling, but when you're working in the shadow of American Werewolf in London, you kind of get overlooked. It's a werewolf movie post.
Well, it's the first time you get to see like a face transform like that.
In American Werewolf.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Like, this is probably why he wasn't as recognized. I mean, The Howling was a good movie. It did have great effects, but it's also in the shadow of American Werewolf. Whereas this had nothing in its path. Right. And it shows, and it still holds up today.
Oh, it does. Yeah. It's some of the best makeup work I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah.
It's even though it's tough seeing the dogs go through that at the beginning.
Sure.
I have to admit it was tough because
you're an animal lover, but I mean,
well, that's the thing. When they mention in movies, don't kill the dogs. It's like, boom, who's the first casualty? The dog.
The dogs. Yep.
And that's Stan Winston stuff. The multiple dogs creature that they had. He helped out with that. Yeah, that was his. But Bottin did most of the design work, and I'm telling you, when the defibrillator scene, oh
God, yeah,
it took so long to film that. Just imagine.
Well, it's
they literally got one guy. They put the actor's a mask on his face. They found a guy with no arms to play that part, just for that one little stunt. It's like there was a lot of prep work in there.
And again, it just goes to show how much practical effects over CGI. Hold to this day over. Yeah. I mean, again, that was all real. The body, chopping down on the arms. It's stop animation, people.
And the stuntman on fire the whole time. That was a long time to be on fire.
That is probably one of the longest fire burns in cinema history. Yeah. And, we can talk about Kane Hodder and his history with fire. You have a very, very short window before things start going really, really, really bad for you. And for them to do a burn like that is just incredible.
Yeah. Well, I think they said the stunt guy was really into it, and it's like, oh.
Well, yeah. Wow. I've done a lot,
You've done a little bit.
I haven't done I've done some makeup effects on myself, but I've studied these stuntmen and these makeup are pretty extensively, and it almost seems like you got kind of categories of stunt guys. Right. There's the fire guys, and then there's the guys who do the car work, and then there's the physical guys who are martial artists and can take the big falls and stuff like that. And again, it really takes someone special to and trust to allow themselves to be put on fire for that long.
Yeah, I know.
And trust the system around them to, and then on top of that, you have to perform in it. Right. It's not just like someone setting you on fire and, walk 3 steps, he had to perform in that, on fire.
He's literally walking fast. He's flailing his arms around, and it's a good 30 seconds at least.
Yeah, it's the only other one fire scene like that I can compare to is the one in Friday the 13th Part 7 where they set Jason on fire, and I think it's a tad longer than that. Mm-hmm. But Kane Hodder has to literally go from basement to upstairs. Yeah, it's all one continuous shot. And then again, anything about Kane Hodder, the man almost died from a fire accident gone wrong. Right, 90% of his body is scarred. And so hats off to these guys. I mean, again, they just don't do it
I think the last one I can think of was Cape Fear when they lit De Niro's. The guy was flailing around for a little bit, and he jumps. It wasn't just he crashing a window. He jumps through the window into the water. It's like, whoa. Yeah, yeah. To be that stunt guys don't get enough credit. They really don't.
They really don't. I mean, because again, not only are you expected to perform and live through these insanely dangerous stunts,
Right.
You have to act at the same time.
Right.
You have to. It's so cool, and it's such a testament. Again, the movie's great, but this movie's nothing without its effects. And,
exactly. And I mean, I know. I don't think Kurt Russell was the first choice, believe it or not. Carpenter couldn't really think of who to cast in MacReady, and I don't know who he had thought of or anything like that. But they literally talking back and forth. I think Kurt Russell had suggested some people, and I didn't hear any names in the documentary. It was. Hey, would you consider me playing MacReady? And of course, Kurt Russell's like, sure. He had fun working with, and I know he was kind of hesitant because I don't think Escape from New York was a huge success.
No, and again, that's another huge classic.
Yeah, so he was worried about having another flop, and let's take a look at the box office tally from that week in 1982.
Yeah, I think this movie was made for like $14 million, made like $19 million.
Yeah,
just barely over its budget.
But I think a lot of that was in re-releases.
Yeah,
it opened up $8. Yeah, $3 million the first weekend. Poltergeist and Annie were beating it, and again, they literally the timing was really bad. Again, a movie of this nature. I mean, it was. Let's see. I'm trying to find out who. It was Universal that released it. You would think, maybe we should hold up. But again, you can't predict how big E.T. was going to be for a success.
Yeah, and again,
it's hard to predict.
It's just one of those things because since Jaws, we're in the era of blockbusters, and man, you just never knew what you were going up against.
Right.
I mean. A few episodes ago, we were talking about Ghostbusters. I mean, dude, Ghostbusters 2 is a great movie. But it's also considered a flop. But what did it open against? It opened against Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Top Gun. you know what I'm saying? It's who knows what you're coming up.
Right. Yeah. In 1989. Yeah.
I mean, so it's like. I mean, who's going to compete with E.T.?
Right, but I honestly think Blade Runner is a little more complicated just because of it's ahead of its time.
Right.
And as we know, with every single movie that's ahead of its time, it doesn't perform well, but it's revered years later.
Exactly.
The Thing, I guarantee, would have made a profit if it opened up in the fall. I guarantee.
Probably. Most certainly.
I don't know. Again, you can't predict a hit.
No.
You can't. But and again, you look back on this and you're shocked that Escape from New York was a disaster. I mean, it's financially. I mean, it's a fun movie.
Right?
It's really a fun movie. But it's unfortunate. And this was a rare occasion. I'm really upset that the documentary didn't talk about this at all. John Carpenter makes his own music for most of his movies.
Yes.
He had Ennio Morricone on this.
Oh, wow.
Ennio Morricone, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, Battle of Algiers, The Untouchables. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't have done The Untouchables yet, but
yeah.
But the guy, one of the greatest film composers of all time, and couldn't have reached out for the documentary on this. He was he was still in his prime. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Some people just don't like doing documentaries, or like being,
true, but they literally, this documentary goes into. They spent a lot of time on the makeup effects and visuals, rightfully so, because that's what makes the movie, makes or breaks it,
right?
But the movie, the music for this is the pulse of the movie.
Sure,
I mean, literally, you have the dun 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 dun, underneath, and it kind of slowly builds, and
right.
I mean, it's dread from the start. I mean, the music, Morricone, more than any film composer, in my opinion, definitely captures the vibe and the time and the place of every movie he does. Mm-hmm. Better than any other film composer. I mean, he was just so phenomenal, no matter what. The guy, talk about people always like, he only won one Oscar, but it's like the guy was above Oscars. The same year, 1966, he did The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in the Battle of Algiers. You probably have not seen the Battle of Algiers, but
No.
Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in itself is one of the most iconic scores of all time.
Sure. Yeah.
And you have the Battle of Algiers, which same composer, and it's like several different themes. It's completely different sounding.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he did. There's a couple of other Italian westerns he did that year. He had like 4 or 5 film scores in 1966.
Wow.
It's like wow. And this is his score for The Thing is iconic. It's so incredible. So, The Thing now is definitely well appreciated and
Rightfully so, and it should be.
Rightfully so. And I know Arrow Video released a nice 4K
Good.
of The Thing a few years back. I think it was for its 40th anniversary. Mm-hmm. And I know there's other limited edition 4Ks out there. There's more video stuff. That's because for some reason it's either Carpenter or Universal better at lending out their stuff, I guess. I don't know if that's the case, but for some reason Warner Brothers has not done the best job with Blade Runner, which is kind of frustrating.
No.
I mean, again, this nice briefcase set was great, but it was limited and they haven't done anything like it since. And to me, it's like maybe they're going to do something for the 50th anniversary, maybe.
But again, I can't speak for obviously Warner Brothers and particularly Blade Runner. I mean, I do know though that where we get so frustrated with some of the stuff Universal puts out today, especially when they're working in their legacy. Right. One thing that they've always hit out of the park is understanding the value of that legacy, which is why we get excellent re-releases of The Thing, the monster movies, and Universal knows their history,
right?
And they are willing to make money still and put content out.
I think it has a lot to do with whomever runs Warner Brothers Home Video in America.
Yeah.
Take a look. We talked about The Exorcist, okay?
Yeah.
That's one of Warner Brothers' biggest movies.
Yeah.
The 50th anniversary, you get this bare bones 4K release with no Blu-ray for its 50th anniversary in the United States. However, in England, they had this wicked, awesome. They had a Bible-looking book, which I think it had the novel in there too.
Oh wow!
It was like a big. It was gone faster. You could say 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
it was gone.
Yeah.
I got the medium edition, which again has all 3 cuts of the film, and I think, or all 2 cuts of the film. There's only 2 cuts to Exorcist, but I think the 4K in the United States has both cuts on it as well on the single 4K. But that was the cool thing. You get all sorts of special features with the medium packed version. You had to import it though. And that thing is like $70-$80. I think you can still get it, but it's quite expensive. And of course, if you wanted to get the limited edition, it's like you pay $300 or $400 now online. But that's the thing. I don't understand with Warner Brothers in the United States. They did their 100th anniversary last year, and they gave us a great Enter the Dragon 4K, but nothing else.
Yeah.
But overseas, you got the Blu-ray with it too. You didn't get the movie of the Blu-ray because there's Criterion has the rights to the Blu-ray, and Arrow did a wicked. It gets really complicated when the major studios lend out their properties to boutique labels. But The Thing, it seems like, has gotten more attention and more love than Blade Runner has as far as home video releases.
Like I was just mentioning, I think Universal appreciates their library way more, or at least they see the profitability in their library.
Could be, yeah.
But again, Warner Brothers has a bigger crowd overseas. You go to like Australia, there's Warner Brothers Land, and it's like their own version of Disneyland,
right?
And it's just like You don't see anything like that over here from Warner
Right,
Brothers.
but I mainly think it has something to do with the guy who runs Warner Brothers in England. For some reason, they get home video releases. They really do. Because this is the 65th anniversary of North by Northwest this year.
Yeah.
And they've got this wicked, awesome 4K set coming out overseas.
But not here.
No, not here.
Wow.
But anyways, these are two iconic films. I always forget to do this. We always forget to do this. Scared for Reels. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X. At Scared for Reels is our handle. Comment, tell us below. Did you love both of these movies, or did you like Blade Runner, or you like The Thing? It's usually pretty neck and neck if you run a poll, but I mean,
right.
It's amazing these two films got released the same day and they both bombed.
They both bombed, but you know what? They're
iconic
and you know, for a show like us where we delve into cult classics, these are at the top of rung of the cult classics.
Right.
You know,
right.
They have built such a following. I said it before at the beginning of the show. They've both aged like fine wine, and we're both very, very lucky to have them. And
see, if you went to the theaters, which one would you see first?
I probably would have gone to Blade Runner for Harrison Ford.
Right.
Because I love his movies.
Yeah, same here. Blade Runner, I would have probably seen several times.
Yeah.
Just because I love this film. Now The Thing, I do like The Thing quite a bit. I probably would have seen it once though in the theaters.
Yeah.
It's still a wonderful film, but Blade Runner to me is a masterpiece. It's essential cinema. It's in my top 250. So, but what do you think about Blade Runner and The Thing? Again, feel free to comment, reach out. I mean, you can comment right on our YouTube channel. We appreciate the people who have commented so far. And again, you can reach out through Facebook, X, Instagram. We're at Scared for Reels.
We'll see you next time on Scared for Reels.